There have been a lot of games coming out recently whose primary mechanic is basically just reading your microphone volume. One that was really popular a little while back is called Don't Scream, and it involves the player walking around, occasionally getting jump scared, and if their mic volume goes over a certain threshold, they die. And that's it. At some point they added like random insta-kill traps that'll also just end your run, which is a questionable decision at best, but with that said, the devs are just two dudes, the game's like $15, and it's not like they're hyping up their game to be anything more than it actually is. It just happened to get popular with streamers and YouTubers, so good for them. There's another similar one called Silent Breath, which is basically the same thing, but with some actually decent Slender Man-like horror gameplay. But still, it's hard to see the mic listening as anything more than a gimmick. Part of the problem with these games is that, in a sense, they're just YouTuber bait. Like, it's a single-player game where you're expected to have your microphone on and be actively talking so that you actually scream when you get jump scared. Maybe this is just me, but if I'm playing a game alone and I'm not sitting there talking to myself, I'm not going to scream if I get jump scared. I'll jump and maybe quietly gasp a little, but I'm not going to make a noise loud enough to get registered as anything above the background noise in my room. But this criticism is largely subjective, and I can see an argument for someone saying, well, I would scream even if I wasn't talking, or I would just play it in a call with friends that I'd be talking to. Or what's wrong with a game that's meant to be played with an audience? Which are all valid counter-arguments. The bigger problem with these games is the fact that, like I mentioned a minute ago, it's hard to see the mic listening as anything more than a gimmick, even if that's the whole point of the game. It doesn't interweave with any of the game's other mechanics, it exists in a vacuum with no relevance to anything other than itself. But let's look at the other side of the coin here, because there are games that do this kind of thing well. The most popular and obvious example is Lethal Company, with its eyeless dogs. As long as you're using the in-game proximity voice chat and not in a Discord call or something with whoever you're playing with, you'd constantly be talking to the people you're playing with. The dogs can hear you, and they'll kill you really quick if you're yapping with your teammates while they're around. This is much better because it actually ties into the game's other mechanics. Verbal communication is really important in the game, and having an enemy that threatens that is a great mechanic. Also, talking isn't the only thing that they can hear. They'll also hear if you sprint or drop something. Another similar interesting mechanic is in the game Phasmophobia, which also has proximity voice chat, and there are certain phrases you can say which will elicit a certain reaction from ghosts. There was also a game from a few years ago called In Silence, which had, get this, proximity voice chat. Shocking, I know. But the game involved players surviving against a monster that could, you're not going to believe this, but the monster could hear the players talking. Sarcasm aside, the part about the game that was actually cool was that you could play as the monster and quote-unquote see things from its perspective. But unfortunately, it looks like the game was abandoned in October of 2021. This reminds me of something else, games with cameras or in-game notepads. A lot of the time these are mostly inconsequential, just being a fun way to catalog your adventures if you're into that, but I never really have been. I played Signalis recently, which is an amazing game, and in it there's a camera, but I decided to play with the difficulty setting where it and the flashlight take up inventory space. The camera in this game is theoretically actually useful because there's a lot of puzzles where you have to remember a code or clue and bring that somewhere else to solve it. I could have just taken a screenshot or even a picture of the screen with my phone, but I never did because I thought it would be stupid to play with that difficulty setting on and then immediately make that choice completely meaningless. But I could have, and if I did, that would be really similar to muting your mic in one of the games I mentioned before. Let's play a game really quick. You think of a word, any word. Got it? Okay, if your word starts with the letter Q, congratulations, you win. If you lost, then sorry, that sucks, but nothing's stopping you from rewinding the video about 10 seconds and picking a word that starts with Q. Although, why would anyone even care about winning a game with those rules anyways? I'm the one telling you what the rules are, but you're the only one actually playing, so you could just say that, actually, you already did win because you decided that whatever word you picked is also a winning word. Congratulations. The question I'm trying to bring up with this is how much do we suspend our disbelief for video games? How much are we willing to follow a game's rules? Obviously, with these mic listening games, the player could just mute their mic and win the game, and obviously the devs know that, but still, these games succeed. On the other side of the coin, a game isn't just going to politely ask you to not go past a certain point, they're going to put a wall there so that you physically can't without some kind of exploit. This is the biggest difference between video games and physical games. The fact that in video games, the player usually can't just choose to change the rules. If I'm playing Uno with friends, we can decide whether or not you're allowed to stack a +2 card on a +4 card, but in, say, Elden Ring, I can't just decide that Melania isn't allowed to use Waterfowl Dance anymore. What would we call this phenomenon where you can change the rules of a game? Maybe we can call it implied rules versus coded rules? Do game exploits and glitches fall into this category just as much as muting your mic in a game like Don't Scream does? What about difficulty settings and accessibility settings? Does plugging your controller into the other port during the fight with Psycho Mantis in Metal Gear Solid count too, even though that's technically intended behavior and completely within the game's coded rules? How meta do we want to get with this? This line of thought is very interesting to me, but I can't think of any other examples of a game where you can change the rules outside of the code without any kind of exploit. But if you can, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. So, thank you for watching. Feel free to like the video if you found it interesting, and I'll talk to you in the next one.